Okay. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Susie, for getting this set up and getting all these people here. Hi, everybody. I'm Jill Schultz. I am a master gardener with the Ontario County Cornell Cooperative Extension. I should ask, can everyone hear me? Just to make sure. Okay, great. And I called this presentation Houseplants 101 because it's a very high level overview of some of the topics related to houseplants and the care of houseplants. Any one of these topics tonight could really be a presentation in and of itself. I've set a rather ambitious agenda, I feel, and I want to manage expectations there by saying it's possible that we won't get through everything that I intended to touch on, but I certainly will try. I also wanted to say tonight that I am not an expert. I am a houseplant lover. I am a gardener. I've been gardening and keeping houseplants pretty much my whole adult life. Last time I counted, I had about 40 houseplants, and I thought that was a good amount of plant until I talked with a woman last week who has 136. So that gives me a little bit of anxiety just thinking about caring for that many plants. But I'm sure it looks beautiful in her house. Anyway, I look forward to sharing with all of you this evening and hopefully dialoguing a little bit as we go along, talking about some of the material in my presentation. I know we have a wealth of knowledge together in this group, so I look forward to hearing from people as we go along. Sarah had said this, but since there's so many people tonight, if you could just keep your comments in the chat or in the question feature, and we'll stop along the way and get to them. And Murphy's Law was present tonight by not allowing me to use my presenter's view for whatever reason. We troubleshooted that for a while, but I'm using paper to look at my notes, so forgive me if you hear some rustling. I want to dedicate this presentation to my grandmother. She gave me all the tools I need to care for plants, including some of the books that I used in developing the presentation tonight. And I inherited many of her houseplants, which some of them I still have to this day, and some of them are well over 3 decades old. So the objectives for this evening are to review cultural practices to keep indoor plants healthy and thriving, identify common indoor plant pests, take a closer look at a few trending plants, maybe understand the effects of indoor plants on air pollution, and explore possible psychological benefits from keeping indoor plants. So as I said, it's a bit ambitious agenda. So we'll get started and see how it goes. Plant requirements. In other words, how do we take care of plants? We're going to hit on the basic requirements for all plants, including houseplants, and that would be water requirements, light, temperature, humidity, feeding, repotting, and a little bit of general maintenance. Those are the big ones. We aren't even going to touch propagation or pruning. So I like the term indoor gardeners, which I borrowed from one of the sources I used to complete this presentation. And I like the quote that I'm about to pull up. It is a fitting start, I think, as we dive into this discussion about house care or houseplant care. Indoor gardeners are often baffled by so much information. If you assemble more than one gardener in the room and begin discussing care, feeding, and sunlight requirements of any species of plant, you'll soon find an argument in the brewing. Even the environmental care of a simple plant like a coleus may start a raging controversy. Although most gardeners will agree that filtered sun is best, very few individuals can come to an agreement about the proper fertilizer and moisture levels for these relatively hardy plants. The opinions are endless, and oddly enough, to a degree, may be correct. So In today's environment where we have information at our fingertips, where we have a lot of opinions and conflicting information, I think that's a very fitting quote. However, I'd like to mention that this book was written in 1974, the book that I got the quote from. Um, so what comes around goes around, and all of this is to say that plants are and have always been extremely tolerant of a wide range of conditions and, frankly, abuse from some of the cultural practices that we subject them to. And you may find some information that I present conflicts with some of the things that you hear or find out there. It will, and perhaps we can talk about some of that as we go along if it comes up. And if you haven't already, you will find what works for you and your plants. So let's start with watering. Lots of different approaches to watering, but it's safe to say that almost all sources agree watering can make or break the health of a plant. It's one of the most common places that things can go wrong. So this was my grandmother's approach to watering. Water them every Friday, take all your plants into the kitchen and one by one put them in the sink, thoroughly soak them from top to bottom until the water's running out. And some plants like to be watered from the bottom. Here's a friend of mine's approach. Water them every Tuesday. Only add enough water to cover the top of the pot, no more, no less. Another friend takes this approach. If they look droopy, give them water. And my neighbor Bob, who loves cactus, takes this approach. So I would say the first two are very reasonable. Both of these women who approach their watering that way once a week, and this is how they do it, have lovely, beautiful plants. I think if they look droopy and give them water, it's not such a good way to go. Cactus, you can get away with a lot. So the fourth approach may work with them. Again, watering can cause a lot of problems, particularly overwatering. Plants are killed or injured more often by improper watering than any other single factor. A general rule of thumb, we could say, is every 10 to 14 days, or when the soil is dry to the first knuckle of your finger, or about 1 inch. But this depends on several factors, including the size of the pot, the size of the plant, larger plants and plants with larger leaves. They appreciate and have a greater demand for water. You want to check them more often than smaller plants or plants with smaller, finer leaves. However, big plants in big pots are going to need less water than plants in smaller pots. Other factors to consider would include the location of the plant in your home as it relates to light intensity and relative humidity. Higher relative humidity tends to reduce a plant's need for water. And you're also going to want to consider the stage of development for the plant. Is it in a rapid growth stage, or is it resting or in dormancy? Plants need less water in the winter, indoor plants, and more often during the growing season. You also want to consider the characteristics of the potting mix. Most people say it's important to use room temperature water to avoid shock to the root system. If water's too cold, it could possibly damage the roots and the leaves. Some sources say tap water is fine for plants. Some sources differ on that. I do let my plant water sit overnight because that's what my grandmother taught me. Certain plants may be susceptible to the chlorine and fluoride in water. Sitting overnight can help the chlorine gas off a little bit. As you care for each of your plants, again, you'll get into a natural rhythm for watering, how often to water them. You might choose a Friday, you might choose a Tuesday, but in general, less is more with watering. It's a good thing to keep in mind. In terms of watering from the top or watering from the bottom, There's different schools of thought. You can read up on the care, and I encourage you to read up on the care of your specific plants or the specific plants that you're caring for to get an idea of what they might prefer. I water all of mine from the top. A lot of it is for convenience. One case for watering from the bottom might be a plant that has completely dried out, and allowing it to soak up water through the bottom can more thoroughly saturate the root ball. That could be beneficial. And if you do water from the bottom, occasional watering from the top helps to wash out some of the salts that accumulate in soil over time. So plants with wet feet or overwatered plants, they'll soon look sick. Their leaves will yellow or drop, flowers collapse. Normally healthy white roots, if the plant does have white roots, which many of them do, will turn brown, even mushy, and die. Unfortunately, overwatered plants often exhibit kind of the same symptoms of underwatered plants, but that sticking your finger in the pot and seeing how far it is dry up to that first knuckle or inch or so can be a good way to, a good barometer. And again, I can't stress it enough. Always remember that it's easier and more detrimental to the plant to overwater it than it is to underwater it. So that would be a big takeaway right there. In terms of temperature, I would say that one of the next most important aspects of house plant care after watering is temperature and humidity. Most of our houseplants come from tropical or subtropical parts of the world, and so they would enjoy higher temps and definitely higher humidity, much higher than what we can offer them in our homes. That said, obviously not all plants have the same requirements. Some may do well in cooler temps than others. I think of when I walk through a conservatory like Highland Park Conservatory, and I go from that lush, really tropical feel where all that green foliage is, and I'm sweating, it's high humidity. And then I go into where the cacti are and the succulents, and it's more dry, more arid, even cooler there. Some examples of plants that can handle a bit lower temps include cyclamen, the cast iron plant, flowering maple, wax begonia, and ivies, geranium, and certain cacti can do well at temperatures of 50 degrees at night or 60s during the day. Whereas plants like an aloe and a rubber plant, they prefer daytime temps of 85 if they could have that, and not falling below 75 at night. But most of our plants, again, as I said in the beginning, tolerate a lot of the abuse that we give them and do well in spite of what our homes are able to offer. When I think of temperature and humidity, I think about placement of plants. Where are we putting them in the home? So when we garden outdoors, we say right plant, right place. Pick the right plant for the right conditions. You can take that same concept, and when we think about where we're putting our plants in our homes. So is it drafty? Is there a heating run with forced air coming out? Do you want to plant up on a shelf where it might be warmer as opposed to a floor where it might be cooler or drafty? Consider windows that don't have such good insulation, and a plant might be sitting too close to it. So those are some of the things to think about with temperature. Humidity is another big one. So plants prosper, the majority of them, let's say, in relative humidity of around 50 to 60%, much more than most people like, and much more than most houses are able to offer. So houses run around 30%, give or take. This picture is a picture taken at Bristol's on in Victor. Lovely greenhouse there, some very nice, well cared for, in my opinion, plants, and they thrive in that environment. So what can we do? You know, if our houses look like this picture, which is taken in the Buffalo Conservatory or the Buffalo Botanical Garden, where there's a waterfall running through it and there's tons of plants packed in together, they would absolutely love it. In our home, We can try to mimic some of this to an extent by grouping plants together to create kind of a microenvironment. We can use shallow containers filled with rocks and or gravel and water, which the water can evaporate and provide a little increase in relative humidity. People also use cold air humidifiers. Warm air might cause too much moisture in your home, contribute to mold issues, and misting. So people like to mist their plants, so it can serve dual purposes for kind of keeping the leaves clean, maybe producing a little bit more humidity. So next I'm going to turn to lighting. So a plant in proper light is better able to withstand the temperatures, either the higher temperatures or the lower temperatures, and the low humidity in many of our homes. But since most of our homes don't provide enough light for plants, we can help them along by using artificial lights or specially built fluorescent plant lights, plant floodlights. Some people even use a simple 100-watt table lamp. So this is a setup that I use in my house. It's a very simple kind of flood lamp that clamps on to different material, fortunately, so I can put them in different places. I like an LED light because they don't get hot to the touch, so I use a full spectrum LED light bulb. Actually, that's the one that I use right there, and I have several of those around the house with different plant groupings. If you want to move plants outdoors in the summer, that's great. I do that sometimes too when I have the time and the inclination. I'll move plants outside for the summer. Be sure to acclimate them. You want to wait till daytime temps are around at least 65 degrees for most plants. Most of them will want some shade, so moving them outside slowly in the shade, bringing them in if it's cool at night, and then eventually leaving them out. You can move plants into more and more sun, the ones that will tolerate them. And whether you're moving them around indoors or moving them inside and outside, given the season, you want to generally avoid sudden changes in light intensity and temperature, which can cause leaf drop. And I learned that the hard way when I had a lovely, beautiful false Aurelia, which was doing so well indoors under a grow light. And I moved it to my enclosed front porch when temperatures were in a good range. And I don't think it was so much the light, but or the temperature, I think it was the light. It dropped almost all of its leaves. It's limping along right now. I'm trying to keep it going, but come to find out, if I had done a little research, false Aurelia seemed to be one of the plants that are more sensitive to light changes. So I could have avoided that if I'd done a little bit more research, but trying to get it to come back. This is another picture in my house where I used a grow light, so that LED light, in a normal kind of lamp. And I have a couple of plants around there. This again is kind of another example of right plant, right place kind of thing. So underneath that light is a Christmas cactus, which likes being really close to all of that light. The taller one is a type of begonia. And the one on the floor, the bushy one, is also a type of begonia, which puts up with lower light. So they work well like that. And all of the plants will have a different preference for each of these kinds of areas. So if you're not using artificial light, in terms of room placement without any source of artificial light, whoops, that's not the one. Sorry about that. That's not the one I wanted to go to. But anyway, that's phototropism. We can go there. So phototropism is a phenomenon that happens when a hormone is released and plants start to bend towards the sun. The top of the plant, the stem, bends towards the sun. The root tends to bend away from the sun. At any rate, we can see the top of the plant, and we've probably all seen this happen where the plant starts listing in one direction. And we can avoid that by turning our plant every once in a while, give it a little turn, and that will help. Okay, this was the slide I thought I was going to. Sorry about that. This is another example of plant placement with artificial lighting. Again, the LED light in those canister kind of clip-on lights. So this is my stairway, and I have three lights going up the stairway, one here at the bottom where I have a ZZ plant and a couple succulents and a little cactus there. And they do what they're doing well with the amount of light, with the closeness that they are to that light right there, which is maybe 2 feet, maybe a little bit more for the ones on the floor. Going up, there is the fiddle leaf fig, and the light above that that you can't see is probably 18 inches from it, and I keep turning that one to face the light, and it's doing well there. And then there's another light up further with some plants on a shelf, but there's a plant on the floor there next to the fiddle leaf fig, and that is a sansevieria or a snake plant, which is tolerant of a lot of different conditions and specifically low light conditions. So that's pretty far away from the light there, and it's doing well. So in terms of not using artificial light and where to put them in your room, in your home, based on light that comes in through the windows, this might seem obvious, but the highlight comes from the south-facing window in general, and you can see some of the plants listed under there that might tolerate that kind of a placement. Medium light, we tend to think of the east or west-facing room or window, and a low light would be a north-facing room or no windows. If you had no windows, you would need to take the plant out of there or add some additional light. But there's a list of plants that would deal with those conditions as well. And this was an interesting graphic. I hope that it shows up so that you can see it. But it's looking at the reflection of light off of different surfaces. So the top one is white plaster, and about 90% of light gets reflected off of that, and in this case, back onto a plant. Going down that image, the gray beige paint reflects about 50% of light. The mirrors obviously are higher, reflect about 80 to 90% of light back into a room. Draperies, heavy drapes absorb a lot, and they only reflect out about 30% of light. So that's another thing you could keep in mind in terms of plant placement and lighting. I thought it was interesting. Again, if you're not using artificial light, plants for the cool north, which gets the least light and heat. There's a few listed here. For the obliging east, which gets that direct morning light from sunrise to midday, many plants are happy in an east-facing window or room. The sunny south has greater seasonal variation due to the angle of the sun in the winter versus the summer. So it can get hot for plants at certain time of year and actually not be enough for some highlight plants during other times of the year. And then the warm west is actually the hottest. It has the highest summer temperatures, which can make it hot for many plants. But succulents would do well here, cacti, annuals, and herbs. The next slide, this is from the Oklahoma State Extension Office. It breaks light requirements into two categories, which can be bite-sized and easy to digest. So it just does low to medium light and medium to high light, and there's lists of plant right there. So many resources out there to choose from to find your own guide for choosing plants in terms of lighting. If anyone wants to come back to that, we could. So let's move on to fertilizing. I'm not going to dive too deeply into this. I'm only going to touch very briefly. I encourage you again to read about the specific requirements of the plants that you care for, that you choose to bring home. Basically, they need to be fertilized to ensure proper growth and development. They need nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, along with some trace minerals in varying amounts. And that's what you're feeding them when you use a commercially prepared food, which most of us do to feed our houseplants. Again, people have different opinions about delivery methods. Some use liquid, granular, spikes. No matter what method you choose, just like water, it's better to use too little than too much, because the roots of potted plants are so restricted. They're easily burned by the application of too much fertilizer at one time. It's important to know the specific plant requirements because flowering plants like orchids or African violets, for example, they need more phosphorus, and you could buy formulations specifically made for those blooming plants. Using a high nitrogen containing food on a plant that blooms a lot results in more foliage growth, and less bloom. My general practice is to use a liquid solution. I just use Miracle Grow. I follow the instructions. I mix it with water. I use it during the growing season only. I don't fertilize my houseplants all year. Some people, like my grandmother, she used a more dilute solution of the fertilizer and water and fed throughout the whole year. One theory being that nutrients are easily leached from soil, and more frequent dilute application is beneficial. Again, she had lovely, lovely plants for many, many years. I know people that do it other ways and equally have as nice plants. Again, no matter what method you choose, it's better to use too little than to use too much. Repotting. So the most appropriate time to repot is in the spring, every 1 to 2 years, although succulents and cacti and slower growing plants will need it less often. But the decision should really also be made based on how your plant looks. What's the plant appearance? Is it top heavy? Look at the roots, pull it out of its pot, take a look at what's going on there. Is it root bound? Does water run right through it when you water it, meaning there's less soil and the roots are kind of taking over? Young plants require more frequent repotting. They're growing faster as plants get older. They may just need a top dressing or just adding some soil to the top of the plant. So in general, again, rule of thumb, you can choose a pot that's about one size larger than the original or in 1 to 2 increment larger than the originals. Too big of a pot, excess soil equals excess water, which will affect the roots if you're tending to overwater, especially. There's debate about clay versus plastic. Plastic tends to hold water more, whereas clay lets water be absorbed. It absorbs the water, it dries out quicker. Cacti might appreciate clay pots. I put everything in clay pot, I think just because I like clay pots, but I also, if I tend to overwater, I feel like the clay pot is going to be more forgiving than a plastic pot. Whatever you choose pot wise, make sure there's a drainage hole in it. You can cover that hole with a rock, a little shard of a broken pot. It'll allow the water go through, but keep the soil in. And then in terms of soil choice, you never want to use garden soil, microorganisms, pests that you don't want in your house. You would bring them in with that soil. A good potting mixture for most houseplants is going to consist of some part of sphagnum peat, vermiculite, and perlite. But again, it varies. Cacti want more sand, more rock, and orchids have very specific potting mix that you can use that often includes bark. All right. This is a picture of a root-bound plant, and this is a great case for paying attention to what you see and looking at the plant and not just going by, oh, that 1 to 2 year increment, or and not going by, we only want to pot in the spring because this is a plant I brought home from the store a couple months ago. It happens to be a ZZ plant. And it is terribly root bound. You can see where it's kind of girdling, the roots are girdling around the top. So this, you'd want to just replant it, which I did right away. You wouldn't wait to, this is the case not to wait to repot your plant, even if it was winter. This is just a nice visual. In general, for repotting plants, you want to avoid excessive damage to the root system. You can, like I did, you can loosen those roots up. You know, they were so bound together. You can gently loosen them up. You want to firm the soil gently around the root ball when you place it into the new pot, but don't press so hard that you're compacting that soil down. Allow enough space at the top so water can be easily added. Should you water newly potted plants? Some say yes, water, let it drain thoroughly, and then don't water again until necessary. Some leave it for a few days before watering. Again, it depends on who you ask and how you look at it. Some say water your plant an hour before you're going to transplant it. I don't water my plants after I transplant them. In general, the roots are moist. They've been in somewhat moist soil, not completely dried out. So I repot my plants. I let them sit for a few days and then I water, and that seems to have been working well for me. It is stressful for a plant to be repotted. Transplant shock or transplant stress is only temporary. You might see a little bit of wilting, leaf drop, growth stops, or slows down. But again, this is only temporary and the plant should bounce back. The last kind of cultural practice I want to touch on is keeping the foliage clean. So for plants to adequately photosynthesize and make the sugars necessary to grow and develop, you need foliage that's clean and not covered with dust or debris, which does collect on leaves, even, you know, when the windows are open, but even when the house is closed down, or maybe especially when we've got forced air coming in during the cool months. You can just take a clean, damp rag, a sponge, wipe those plants off. It gives you a good chance to look at your plants and see what's going on with them. You can dip them upside down into a bucket of water. You can put plastic around the soil, and this works for smaller plants, not bigger ones. Dip them upside down, give them a little wash or a shower. My grandmother used to take her plants and put them in the shower occasionally. Certain plants probably don't need that so much. I'm thinking of hairier type plants, that type of thing. You can use on cacti a small toothbrush, a gentle brush to kind of scrub off debris or clean them up, so to speak. Bringing a new houseplant home, these might seem obvious, but you want to purchase only healthy looking plants, right? If it's supposed to be a deep green foliage, you want that foliage to be deep green, unless it's supposed to be another color. You want to check for pests. You might find those on the underside of leaves, so you can look them over that way, or in the axil where the leaf meets the stem. Examine the root system. Take them out of the pot as long as the people that work there aren't looking. Just give them a quick look, take them out of the pot, make sure the roots look healthy. Most plants have white roots, not all, but most do. So you'd want to see them looking white, healthy, not black or brown, no funky smell. And when you take them to your car and into your home, protect them from the cold and the wind, put them in a bag. And then when you get them home, you can place them away from other plants for a period of time just to be sure something didn't come in with them, kind of get the sense of what the light requirement is for them, where they're going to do well in your home. So just to review what we've already gone over, we talked about watering. Good rule of thumb, water when the top 1 inch of your soil up to your first knuckle is dry. Lighting, it really depends on the plants. There's lots of options for using artificial light if you're able to do so, putting the right plant in the right window, that type of thing. Temperature, ideally, our houseplants would love, the majority of them, a temperature around 70 to 78 degrees. Most of our houses in the winter are not like that, but they do okay. You just want to avoid cold drafts, heating ducts. Humidity, again, they would love 50 to 60% humidity. We probably wouldn't, but you can try misting, grouping them together using pebble trays, humidifiers. Fertilizing, again, less is more, maybe only during the growing season. And repotting once a year, depending on the plant. Spring is best, and transplant shock is only temporary. So I would like to stop here, see how we're doing, see if there's any questions. Yeah, see what's come up. I think, go ahead, Sarah.
So right now, I put a couple cues out on the chat, and hopefully people have seen that. But if you do have a question, the chat is open. We didn't have any questions submitted to this point, but feel free to do that now. You're not late. And
Not at all.
also, just about everybody has completed the poll. But if you haven't had a chance because you're late to join, that's still open as well. And you're welcome to, it's not required, but you're welcome to do the poll. But I don't have any questions yet, Jill. Unless
Okay.
folks have them, they can drop it in the chat or unmute yourself and ask Jill while we're on a break here.
Yeah, feel free to unmute yourself if you're
Any
feeling
suggestions
brave.
for peace lilies?
So I don't have any peace lilies. And I have never grown peace lilies. I know they're a super popular plant, and my understanding is they're pretty easy to care for, low light tolerant. I don't know if anyone else out there has experience with specifically with peace lilies, but really mine is limited.
Anybody want to comment on a peace lily advice while we're on the subject? It's welcome.
I can, Sarah.
Okay, go for it,
Except I
Susie.
think you stopped my video.
Oh, can you
Anyway.
not do it? Can you not turn it on?
Anyway, I have peace lilies, and I've learned that they don't like to be in drafts. That one of them used to be my front door, and not that the front door opened that much, but when it did, especially in the winter, the thing would just go, and its arms would just go down. So now it's out of a draft. It's in a fairly dark place, but it seems quite happy. It's one of those plants that lets you know when it wants water because the leaves will be droopy. So other than that, I've had one of them for over 30 years, and it's still doing okay. And I think I've only ever repotted it once. So
someone told me that peace lilies to use distilled water. Have you ever done that, or do you just use tap water?
I just use tap water, and sometimes the tap water's sat around for a while, and sometimes it hasn't. It hasn't seemed to affect it.
Okay,
I know
good.
a lot
Thank
about,
you.
as I say, I know a lot about peace lilies as well, Spathiphyllum, and they are probably one of the easiest plants to grow because of what she just said. When they're thirsty, they let you know. I think the biggest problem with spath sometimes can be, especially if you have the really large leaf and you purchase it as a larger plant, say an 8-inch pot or a 10-inch pot, when you're getting more of the broader leaf. Spathiphyllum, they tend to, their roots bind. And so you have to be mindful of that too, because it seems like they're always there.
Oh, I think we lost you, Vicki.
I think we looked, yeah. What was she?
Thank you.
What plant was she talking about there?
She was talking about a peace lily.
Oh, it was. Okay, she just called it something.
Oh, Spathiphyllum.
Oh, okay. And what did you say at the end? We lost you.
Well, I'm not sure what I was saying. I was talking about the broader leaf spath plant. They get root bound, and you'll know it. It's really hard to keep them happy, and it seems like you're always giving them water, and they're always drooping their leaves, and then you really know that you need to repot.
Oh, okay, that's probably my problem. Thank you, because I just lost one, and I think that's why they were always drooping.
Oh,
Got it. Okay, thank you.
I have a question, if I can just ask at this time. I started putting in the chat and then I don't know what happened to it.
Sure.
It didn't mention the plants. I noticed on one of my plants that I brought from the outdoors, and I didn't have this problem when it was when I first got it, but all of a sudden I noticed today that it had like little sticky, maybe aphids on it. They're like little tiny bugs are sticky. So I think that's what they are. Is that what it is? Aphids? And also
What a
I,
mite. Maybe.
pardon?
I
What
had
color
that
are they?
on as a mite.
Kind of like a greenish brown. I'm gonna go out there right now and look. But the other I have problems with is clivia. And I get the white cottony
The
mealy.
mealy bugs. Yeah.
Can you address insects
Yeah.
on
So it's
plants?
so funny, Vicky. That is such a wonderful segue into the next section. So, in interest of time, I appreciate all the questions, and we can, if people want to stay on after and talk more about
Yeah,
houseplants,
because
that's
there are
great.
quite a few more.
We can absolutely do that. Trying to be mindful of the time. I said this is ambitious and I'm not going to get all the way through it, but my next section, I'm touching on pests. And one of the ones I'm going to focus specifically on is mealybugs. So why don't I go ahead and do that?
Okay.
That was a great segue. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So prevention is really key for this, just like our own health for humans. You know, having proper growing conditions, having a healthy plant, there's less commonly going to be a problem when plants are doing well. So diseases and pests, they're usually brought in by newly purchased plants or by plants that have been outside in the summer. You, as I mentioned earlier, you want to look at the leaves, particularly the underside, and the root ball. Plants can crawl up through the drainage hole, so you can again take your plant out gently. It works better for smaller plants. Just kind of look at the root ball. When you're watering, cleaning the leaves, it's a great time to examine them for any signs of pests or damage. You can do this weekly. You can use a 10x microfying lens, those little ones that you can get anywhere really on Amazon. Make it easier to see small pests and when they're in the growing stage and they're smaller and harder to see. Infestations caught earlier are just much easier to manage before they get out of control. So I want to touch specifically, someone mentioned aphids. Vicky, you mentioned aphids. Spider mites are also common problems. Scale insects can be as well. These are some of the common ones. White flies. And then mealy bugs is where I'm going to spend time this evening because I had to pick one. Didn't have enough time to do them all. Again, this could be a presentation in and of itself. This is one that I'm having a lot of trouble with myself right now. So I brought a plant home from a person that I knew really well who passed away, unfortunately. And the plant was very important to me. I didn't take the time to really look it over. So I had that plant for a while. And then I realized one day that on the leaf of that plant, it was some kind of a palm. There was some sticky stuff on it. And I tried to wipe it off. I just wasn't sure what it was. I thought something got on there. And then I discovered that it was honeydew, which is what mealybugs excrete. And it can be a sign that you have them even before you see them because they are so small. This is the damage that they do. They are sap suckers. This was, so let me back up. That plant I had to get rid of. I couldn't save it. But in the meantime, it infected one other plant. Fortunately, only one other plant, and it's remained that way. This plant is by itself in another room. This is also one of my grandma's plants, so I'm just don't want to get rid of it. It's a Hoya. It used to be green and lovely, and this is what one of the leaves looks like. Well, I threw it away. It looks like now it's gone. The insects themselves are about 1/8 to 1/4 of inch long. I've never seen one 1/4 of an inch long. That's pretty big for these. I've seen them smaller, definitely visible to the eye, but some of them, when they're smaller, are very small, and you could use that magnifying lens to see them. They can move around the plant. They tend to remain immobile and can drift through the air or on a breeze. They have a white waxy coating, and it makes them hard to get rid of. And it looks cottony when you see them. And I think, Vicki, that's what you were talking about, that cottony kind of look. They're often found on the underside of leaves and in leaf axils, right, where the leaf meets the stem. And cacti and succulents are at particular risk. So the Hoya is in that group. And that's the plant that has it right now. I've done all kinds of things to try to get rid of it. I've gone leaf by leaf by leaf with water, with a Q-tip, with rubbing alcohol. I think I've eradicated them, and I've done this several times, but I just keep trying because the plant is important to me. Sometimes an insecticidal soap spray can be used. I haven't gone that avenue yet. I don't generally use that on my plants. I don't know, I might consider it to save this one if I thought that it would. I do want to make mention, though, they're found on the plants, on the underside of plants. This picture is a picture of a plant stand that the Hoya was on. The plant stand is turned upside down. This is the bottom, so you can see the feet, the little round feet of the plant stand, and you can see the white stuff underneath the round ball. And those are mealybugs. You can see in the distance too, and the other one, it's a little bit blurry, but those are mealybugs. So I had to scrub everything. I had no idea that they would, I don't know how long they would live there. They need the nutrients from the plant, but maybe someone on this Zoom tonight knows more, but that's where they were hiding out. So I just caution everyone to look for that. So I hope that's helpful, Vicki. Water, going one by leaf, really, and getting rid of them. And rubbing alcohol. I use rubbing alcohol on the Hoya, probably way more liberally than I should have, although it's held up okay. I think with some other plants, the alcohol might be a problem. Thoughts or questions real quick about that, about pests, because that's all I'm really going to touch on with pests.
I have a question about the mealybugs. Do you know if they
Yeah.
live in the soil?
They can. So there is actually a species, that's a great question, that can live in the soil. My understanding, it's different species. So can they exist at the same time? Like perhaps there's some in the soil and feeding on the roots, and some at the top of in the top part, growing part of the green part of the plant, maybe. So I may repot this plant, actually. That might be my next step too. Yeah, good question. So I was going to hit on some trending plants. Houseplants are really having a moment. And that moment actually is brought to you by the millennials. So there was a 2016 National Gardening Survey, and it was in a 2018 article where I came across it from the New York Times, where 5 out of 6 people who picked up gardening in 2016 were between the ages of 18 and 34. And 31% of houseplant sales that year were made by millennials. So houseplants are having a moment, which is wonderful because more and more people are discovering the joy of taking care of plants, of having plants in the homes, you know, talking about plants and sharing their experience. The price is also going up for plants. But as we know from my 1974 plant book, what goes around comes around, and everything old is new again. So let's take a look at a few of the kind of trending Instagram superstars right now that are having a moment, or are really just plain interesting, some of them too. So the staghorn fern, this is a picture of one that I took at Gallia greenhouse. It is a pretty cool plant. It is a fern, it's an epiphyte. So in the wild, it grows on another plant. They had a lot of staghorn ferns there at Gallia's. I didn't come home with one, unfortunately, because several of the plants had mealybugs. So someday I'm going to bring one home. It wasn't that day. The common name comes from its antler-like appearance. And one of the really interesting things about these plants is that brown part of that plant is actually a frond. It's a sterile kidney-shaped frond. At the base, it browns with age. It clasps onto the support, whatever support is there. And that slight curve in it allows debris from the canopy, if it was growing in the wild, to fall in there to rot. And that's one of the ways that the plant gets nutrients. You can wrap that root ball in damp sphagnum moss, tie it to a board like they've done here. There's lots of different ways to grow them. If anyone's been to the Highland Park Conservatory or wants to go, they have a gorgeous staghorn fern that must weigh hundreds and hundreds of pounds. It's supported by big chains. It's absolutely beautiful. You want to handle it with care. The white felty layer that you can kind of see from that picture is really easily damaged. So that's a staghorn fern. Having a moment. Another one is the Swiss cheese plant, the Monstera deliciosa. So this is a picture of a plant that I have since repotted. The pot, you can see where that's a really top heavy pot. Some of the aerial roots are kind of coming out of the pot. Those aerial roots can actually be pushed back, and when you put it in a bigger pot into the soil, they'll help provide some nutrients and moisture for the plant. Adequate light is needed for this plant to produce that deeply cut foliage. This isn't the best picture, but you can see some of the deep cuts in that foliage. The small and mature plant, the young plant, doesn't have those deep grooves. So there's often confusion about what this plant is. Is it a philodendron? What is it? There's a raging debate on the internet about what plant is what. But the monstera will eventually get these beautiful cut leaves in them. And later on, if we get to it, we'll see a split leaf philodendron, which this plant often gets confused with. The fiddle leaf fig is another one. This picture was taken at Bristol greenhouse, a couple of fiddle leaf figs there. We saw one earlier in the presentation when we were talking about lighting. That was a smaller one. That was one that I bought at Home Depot for $20. And I've seen the same size one in garden stores for $60 or more. That's another whole debate about where to buy your plants, buying them from big box versus local, and people land in different places, but sometimes price is just a consideration for folks. This is a very large and diverse genus. It includes the rubber tree plant. It includes the edible fig. It generally tolerates a wide range of temps, watering regimens, growing conditions. I did find when I brought mine home, as I was learning about the care of it, I tended to give it more water than it needed. It would get brown spots on the lower leaves. Some of them fell off. Once I got that adjusted, it's thriving. It's doing really well. Couple more minutes left. I want to go on to the pitcher plant. This is just an absolutely fascinating plant. This is a picture of one from the garden factory. They happen to carry a lot of pitcher plants. They always have a lot when they go there. They're beautiful. One has not come home with me yet because apparently it's a challenging plant to grow in terms of its cultural practices. It's the needs that it has for lighting, for temperature, for especially humidity. This is an epiphytic. It's a carnivorous plant. Again, it needs a lot of high humidity, or that pitcher that we see right there won't form. And that pitcher has nectar glands at the mouth of it, which produces a scent to attract insects into it so it can get its nutrients. So if you happen to get one occasionally during the growing season, you might want to drop a few live or freshly killed insects into the pitcher. Apparently they have pretty low nutrient requirements. And this is a plant, we didn't talk much about pruning or shaping of plants, but this is a plant you could prune heavily in the spring to encourage new growth. So I'm going to stop there to be respectful of time. I had a feeling there was part of the presentation I wouldn't get to. I'd love to do another one sometime, and I'm sorry that I tried to pack so much into one presentation. I wasn't able to touch on some of the other things I would have liked to, but thank you so much for listening. And I'll fly through. We were going to talk about all of this. Again, plants are good for our health. We know that just by looking at kids and cats. So thank you so much. I appreciate everybody's time. I'd love to hear from people who are willing to stay on and chat. Email me with thoughts, questions. Love to